The factory bell rang at dawn, and with it came the shuffle of bare feet, tiny, calloused, and trembling. Children as young as 8 filed into the spinning mill, swallowed whole by the thunder of machines that never slept. Some would leave with mangled hands, some would never leave at all. The first sound was always the bell. It rang before the sun lifted its head over the red brick mill, before the roosters crowed on the dirt-packed farms outside town. The bell did not sing, it commanded. Children woke to it. Thin arms groped for patched clothes in the dark. Mothers laced worn boots onto trembling feet. The younger ones sometimes whimpered, pressing their faces into the straw mattress, whispering, "Just 5 more minutes." But there were no minutes. Not when the overseer's cart rattled down the street, ready to note the houses of those who failed to send their children. The air was sharp with coal smoke as they gathered outside, dozens of small figures wrapped in shawls too thin for the biting wind. Some carried lunch pails with nothing more than a crust of bread. The older boys tried to look brave, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They were still children, only 13, 14 at most, about to spend 14 hours in hell. Inside the mill was a world of thunder. The floors shook beneath endless rows of machines, belts spinning, wheels clanging, cotton dust rising like a ghost in the air. That dust would creep into the lungs, settling there forever. It made the children cough, but coughing was dangerous. An overseer's strap could land on your back for slowing the rhythm. Anna, only 10, tied her hair with a rag before stepping between the spindles. She had already learned the lesson. One strand caught in the rollers, and your scalp could be torn away. Beside her, her brother Samuel, 12, stood ready with a broom longer than his body, sweeping lint before it ignited. Their father had died in the very same mill 2 winters ago, crushed beneath a slipped gear. Now his children kept his place, their mother scrubbing floors in the boarding house to make up the difference. The bell marked their lives, ringing at dawn to begin, ringing at dusk to release. Every toll was a reminder they belonged to the mill. And if you were too weak, too slow, or simply unlucky, the mill would take more than your time. It would take your childhood. Sometimes it would take your life. The day it happened began like any other: smoke, coughing, and the bell's cold command. By noon, the air inside the mill was so thick with lint that the sunlight through the grimy windows looked like beams underwater. The children worked half-blind, guided by instinct more than sight. Anna's friend, Clara, was only 9. Too small to reach the spindles without climbing onto a stool, she darted between the machines like a mouse. Her fingers were nimble, quick enough to knot broken threads while the rollers still spun. That speed was why the overseers loved her, and why they didn't care about the danger. Samuel noticed it first, the thread snapping, the machine snarling as if alive. He shouted, "Clara, wait!" But his voice was swallowed by the deafening roar of iron and gears. Clara leaned closer, her tiny hands reaching for the tangled strand. The scream tore through the mill. Machines did not stop. They devoured. The roller grabbed her sleeve, yanking her arm into the teeth of steel. By the time the overseer slammed the emergency lever, it was too late. The children froze, eyes wide, their bodies trembling. Some cried, some stood silent, their faces pale as chalk. Clara's small body lay crumpled on the floor, the sleeve torn away, her arm mangled beyond saving. The doctor would come, they said, but in mills like these, a doctor's arrival was just a formality. Broken children did not heal. They disappeared. That evening, when the bell released them, Anna and Samuel walked home in silence. The street seemed longer, darker. The mill had taken Clara, just as it had taken their father. But what terrified Anna most wasn't the sight of blood or the sound of Clara's scream. It was the way the overseer's face showed no sorrow, only irritation, as if a machine had broken, nothing more. The children understood the truth that night. The mill was hungry, and it would keep eating until someone stopped it. The next morning, the bell rang again. It always rang, no matter who didn't return. Clara's bed was empty, her stool by the spindles already reassigned to another girl. The machines did not mourn. They demanded hands, any hands. Anna tied her rag tighter around her hair. Her chest felt heavy, but she forced her feet forward. Samuel walked beside her, his jaw clenched. He had not spoken since yesterday. Inside the mill, children's eyes flicked to the dark stain still visible on the floorboards where Clara had fallen. The overseers ignored it. They barked orders, lashes of their voices striking harder than their straps. Work faster, work cheaper, or don't work at all. But something had changed. The children moved with the same speed, the same fear, yet their glances carried a new weight. Whispers spread like sparks. Clara's gone. They don't care. We're nothing but tools. At break, huddled in the shadow of the coal furnace, Anna whispered, "If they can do this to Clara, to my father, what's to stop them from taking us all?" Samuel's voice was low, shaking with rage. "Nothing, unless we stop them first." The words were dangerous. Children had been beaten for less. But instead of silencing him, the others leaned closer. A boy with scarred fingers muttered, "My brother lost his hand last winter. They tossed him out like trash." Another girl whispered, "They said Clara's family won't even get paid this week." No arm, no wages. The whispers grew into something else, not yet defiance, but the beginning of it. The knowledge that they were not alone in their pain, that the cruelty wasn't just fate, but design. That night, Anna lay awake, listening to the distant hum of the mill. For the first time, she imagined a world where the bell did not rule them. A world where children were not swallowed whole by iron and dust. The seed of rebellion had been planted. It was fragile, dangerous, but alive. It began with a cough, not Anna's, not Samuel's, but Thomas's, the oldest of them, 15 and already bent like an old man. His lungs rattled with every breath, cotton dust filling them inch by inch. One morning he collapsed by the spinning frames, his body shaking, lips blue. The overseer barely glanced over. "Drag him outside," he barked. "He's slowing the line." 2 boys obeyed, hauling Thomas's limp frame into the yard. Work resumed instantly, as though nothing had happened. The children's faces were pale, their hands trembling. They had seen it too many times, a child sick today, gone tomorrow. At lunch, Samuel stood where Clara once sat. His voice was low, but steady. "They'll keep killing us, one by one, unless we make them listen." Anna's heart pounded. "Samuel, stop!" But he didn't stop. He looked at the dozen hollow-eyed faces around him and said, "What if we don't ring their bell? What if we stop the machines?" The words hit the children like a match in dry grass. Some gasped, others whispered frantically. To stop the machines meant punishment, straps, prison, maybe worse. But to keep them running meant more Claras, more Thomases. That evening, when the bell released them, Samuel lingered by the mill gate. He pressed a small stone into Anna's hand. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "I'll throw this into the gears, just for a moment, long enough for them to hear us." Anna's stomach twisted. "They'll beat you." "Better me than another Clara." His eyes burned with something she hadn't seen before, not just anger, but purpose. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. The mill loomed outside the window, its smokestacks bleeding black into the stars. She clutched the stone Samuel had given her, her fingers trembling. For the first time, She wondered if children's hands could truly break the machine that had eaten so many of them. And as dawn approached, the bell began to toll. The mills swallowed them as always, heat, dust, the thunder of iron. But something was different. Beneath the overseer's shouts, beneath the shriek of belts and gears, a pulse of nervous energy ran through the children. They knew today would be different. Samuel's face was pale, but his eyes locked with Anna's across the spindles. In his pocket, the stone pressed against his thigh like a secret heartbeat. He worked with one hand, the other curling and uncurling, waiting for the moment. The overseer's boots thudded across the floorboards. His strap slapped against his palm. "Faster! You're half asleep, all of you!" Anna's hands shook as she knotted broken threads. Her ears rang with Clara's scream, Thomas's cough, her father's silence. She thought of Samuel's words, "Better me than another Clara." Then it happened. Samuel bent, quick as lightning, and flung the stone into the spinning gears. The sound was deafening. Metal shrieked against metal. The frame shuddered. Sparks spat across the floor. Belts whipped free like angry snakes. The entire line of machines groaned and ground to a halt. For the first time, silence fell inside the mill. Children froze, their chests heaving. Dust hung motionless in the air. Every mote caught in a shaft of light from the cracked windows. It felt holy, terrifying, free. Then the overseer roared. His strap lashed out, striking Samuel across the shoulder. Samuel staggered but did not cry out. Instead, he shouted with all the strength in his small lungs, "We are not your machines!" The words exploded in the silence, echoing off brick and steel. Children gasped, some covering their mouths, others clutching their tools as if they too could become weapons. The overseer raised his strap again, but this time half a dozen children stepped between him and Samuel. Their small bodies formed a trembling shield. Anna's voice cracked, but it carried, "If you beat one of us, you beat us all." The overseer's face twisted, uncertain for the first time. Behind him, the great wheels stood still. And in that breathless moment, the children realized something powerful. The mill only lived if they kept it alive. The mill's silence did not last long. By nightfall, word had spread through every boarding house and tavern. Children stopped the machines. Some whispered it with awe, others with fear. But to the mill owners, it was nothing less than rebellion. The next morning, the bell rang louder, harsher, as if to punish them. Outside the gates, men in black coats waited, owners, managers, and the town sheriff, his badge glinting in the grey light. The overseer stood beside them, a bruise blooming on his cheek where one of the belts had snapped back. His eyes burned with vengeance. The children were herded inside. Samuel's back still ached from the lash, but he walked tall. Anna clutched his hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. By mid-morning, the sheriff entered the mill. He stood on a crate, his voice booming above the roar of machines. "You are here to work. If you refuse, you will answer to the law. Disorder will not be tolerated." The law. The children stared at him, bewildered. What law protected them? Clara's broken arm had not been worth a word of justice. Thomas lay coughing blood in a shack with no doctor. Their fathers, their mothers, ground to dust in the machines. No law had stopped it. Samuel stepped forward, his lips split, his eyes fierce. "We only want to live," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Is that against the law?" A murmur spread through the floor. Boys, girls, even a few older women bent over looms raised their heads. The sheriff's hand twitched near his baton. The owners exchanged sharp whispers. They wanted obedience, not attention. That evening, the children were marched home under watchful eyes. Their mothers wept, begging them to keep quiet, to endure. But Anna felt something stirring in the streets, in the alleys, even in the exhausted faces of grown men who worked the night shift. The mill owners had tried to crush a protest. Instead, they had lit a fuse. The strike began with whispers. A mother in the boarding house kitchen muttering, "They'll kill our children if we let them." A father from the night shift shaking his head. Maybe it's time someone stood up. By the third morning, whispers turned into shouts. The children refused to enter the mill. Instead, they gathered outside the gates, their small hands clutching one another's, their lungs raw from chanting, "No more broken bodies! No more stolen lives!" Anna's voice cracked, but she screamed until her throat burned. Samuel stood at the front, his shirt torn from the overseer's strap, his defiance shining brighter than the factory's smoke. Adults began to gather, at first just mothers clutching shawls, then fathers fresh off night shifts, then whole families. They saw their children's faces, pale, gaunt, eyes far too old for their years. And something snapped. A burly coal worker shouted, "If the kids can fight, so can we." He lifted his soot-blackened fist into the air. Others followed. Soon the square rang with hundreds of voices louder than the factory bell itself. The owners panicked. They called in the sheriff, then deputies, armed with clubs. The overseer spat at Samuel's feet. "Back to work, or we'll grind you down like the rest." But this time, the children did not cower. This time, the town stood with them. When the deputies advanced, women formed a wall holding their children close. Men shoved back, voices rising, "You'll have to beat us all." The standoff stretched into hours. The mill's wheels stood still, its chimneys cold for the first time in decades. Every moment of silence cost the owners money, and that silence spoke louder than any bell. Anna looked around at the sea of faces, children, mothers, fathers, strangers, united by a single truth. They were not machines. They were human, and they would be heard. For 3 days the mill stood silent. Smoke no longer bled into the sky, and the town seemed to breathe for the first time in years. But silence had a price. The owners bled money, and their fury grew. On the fourth morning, the sheriff returned with reinforcements, deputies on horseback, clubs gleaming, rifles slung across their shoulders. They lined up at the gates, their horses stamping, breath steaming in the cold air. The owners stood behind them, their silk coats snapping in the wind, eyes like knives. "Disperse," the sheriff commanded, "or you'll be dispersed by force." The children clung tighter to one another. Samuel stepped forward, his bruises still livid on his skin. "We won't go back," he shouted. "Not until it ends." The air quivered with tension. Deputies shifted in their saddles. Mothers wept. Fathers clenched fists. Anna felt her knees tremble, but forced her chin up. Her heart hammered so loud she thought the sheriff must hear it. Then, from the crowd, an old man's voice broke the silence. He had worked in the mill 30 years, his back bent, his hands twisted from labor. He stepped forward, raising his cane like a banner. "They ate my life," he cried, his voice raw. "But they will not eat our children." A roar erupted, hundreds of voices, one thunderous cry. The deputies faltered, horses rearing at the noise. The owners shouted, demanding control, but their words were drowned. The sheriff hesitated. He saw the size of the crowd, the fire in their eyes, the sheer force of desperation turn to defiance. To break them now would mean blood in the streets. At last, he spat into the dirt and lowered his baton. "This isn't my fight," he muttered. He turned his horse. One by one, the deputies followed. The owners were left standing alone, pale and trembling. Behind them, their silent mill loomed like a tomb. For the first time, it was clear who held the true power. The machines did not move unless the children fed them. And the children had stopped. News spread faster than coal smoke. By the week's end, newspapers from Boston to New York carried the headline, "Children Shut Down Mill." Reporters swarmed the little town, scribbling in notebooks, sketching Anna's pale face, Samuel's scarred back, the crowds of children who had dared to stop the machines. For once, their stories were not buried in whispers, but printed in bold ink for the nation to read. Photographs captured the truth: thin bodies hunched by looms, bare feet blackened by dust, a girl no taller than a broomstick with missing fingers. America gasped. Mothers in faraway cities clutched their own children, asking, "How can this be happening here?" The owners fought back, of course. They called the children liars, claimed the accidents were rare, the wages fair. But Clara's empty bed, Thomas's ragged cough, and the dozens of small graves on the hill told a different story. Activists arrived, preachers, union leaders, women with voices sharp as steel. They held rallies in churchyards demanding laws to protect the young. Ministers thundered from pulpits, "A nation that eats its children cannot call itself free." The children themselves became symbols: Samuel's defiance, Anna's trembling but unbroken courage. They were no longer invisible. They were evidence, proof that even the smallest voices could stop the largest machines. Change did not come overnight. Owners schemed, politicians stalled. But the strike had cracked something open. For the first time, people were listening. For the first time, the mill's hunger was seen for what it was, a crime. And as Anna lay awake at night, she could still hear the bell in her dreams. But now it no longer commanded her. Now it sounded like the tolling of an ending. The mill never rang the same again. Within months, inspectors arrived, laws debated, and for the first time, children were pulled from machines and sent to schools. Not all mills changed, not all owners obeyed, but the tide had shifted. The nation had seen. Anna never forgot Clara's scream, nor Thomas's cough, nor the countless names carved into small, weathered gravestones. Samuel carried scars across his back for the rest of his life, each line a reminder of what it had cost to speak. Some children never lived to see the change. Their names faded from the payroll books, but not from memory. Every law signed, every mill shuttered, every bell silenced was paid for with their blood. Years later, Anna stood on the hill above the town, now quieter, the mill's windows dark. Beside her, Samuel's voice was soft but certain. "We were children, but we made them listen." And that was the truth. The mill had eaten children, but in the end, those same children had broken its teeth. Even the smallest voices, when joined together, can shake the largest machines. Injustice thrives on silence, but it only takes one brave no to awaken 1,000 more. Subscribe for more untold stories, because history is filled with battles where dignity and courage triumphed against impossible odds.